How strong would Joseph Joestar be with every stand? Well, obviously broken. But how broken? We want in-depth answers. Obviously, this isn't a realistic thing. It's mainly to look at what crazy collection of powers this series has as a whole. And with all of these stands combined, these powers would be able to do even crazier things while working with other powers. Of course, we can look at non-canon stands too, like the ones from George Joestar or video games. Obviously, there's The World Over Heaven, and that's cracked beyond belief. But for simplicity, we'll only be using stands from the mainline manga, so everything from parts 1 to 9 is fair game, both the main verse and the Steel Ball Run verse. Obviously, there will be some spoilers in terms of stand abilities, but no major story spoilers. Just keep that in mind. Why Joseph though? Well, I did a poll asking who you guys thought was the smartest JoJo. I would have loved to have all the JoJos in this poll since they're all pretty smart in their own ways, but we only have 4 options on these polls, so I just picked these 4. A lot of people regard Joseph as pretty smart to begin with. This isn't to say that he's objectively the smartest, just that you guys voted for him in the poll, so he's gonna be here. And I do think with his intellect, he'll be able to make great use of all these stands. Of course, we're gonna be using Peak Part 2 Joseph specifically. This time around, Joseph is becoming the ultimate life form, not Cars. Let's get the obvious, absurdly broken stands out of the way first, and then we'll go to the less obvious ones. Those ones might surprise you more, especially with how Joseph could be able to use them in tandem with each other. Right off the bat, he has Star Platinum the World, as well as the World. 2 very physically impressive stands, both with the ability to stop time. It makes me wonder how the 2 stands together would work, but maybe it would just be kind of redundant and wouldn't really affect anything. He also has Killer Queen Bites the Dust, giving him the ability to make anything into an explosive, creating remote bombs, or reversing time with Bites the Dust, depending on how he uses that ability, of course. And not that this stand is really powerful, but he'd have Stray Cat too, so he could use the 2 together. He also would have Gold Experience Requiem, so he has all the Gold Experience powers like life manipulation and transferring damage, but then the Requiem abilities too, negating willpower and actions, automatic defenses, the death loop, everything. Plus he would have King Crimson, allowing him to see things in the future and cut out chunks of time. Another form of crazy time manipulation. Already he's starting to look pretty broken. But things start to get crazier because he also has Made in Heaven. This grants him infinite acceleration, a stand with the universal range as well. He'll be controlling gravity and time, and he can apply this power in a lot of unique ways. And if that's not enough, he has D4C with Love Train. He could hop through dimensions, or he could sponge people by getting them in contact with a different version of themselves, killing them right off the bat. But then he has all the other abilities too, such as redirecting misfortune, and also making even smaller wounds deadly, as well as just shifting the battlefield around him too. He also has the counter to this stand, Tusk Act 4. We are giving him every stand, so there's no point limiting this, which means by default, he'd have access to the highest forms of spin, including the Super Spin and the Golden Spin. So with the stand, he has homing attacks that cross dimensions, he can teleport himself, he can negate durability, and he can make any target spin infinitely. Then there's Wonder of You, which lets him basically manipulate logic, fate, luck, and even calamity. And since Pursuit could activate this also kind of makes Joseph untouchable in a way, unless they could avoid calamity somehow. Such as if someone had Soft and Wet Go Beyond, which Joseph would have. More logic manipulation, plus he could steal things with bubbles, and also apply spin in this way too. It looks like he's taken after Caesar because now he could use bubbles to his advantage. Hopefully using the stand won't make him sad. So those are the obvious really strong ones out of the way. So he has multiple forms of time manipulation, he could use infinitely powerful spin, he's untouchable basically in 2 ways thanks to D4C Love Train and thanks to Wonder of You, and King Crimson lets him see the future with Epitaph. Not only can he see fate, but he can control it too. Plus he could warp time, gravity, and his own speed. And Gold Experience Requiem is there to defend him as well, essentially a 3rd way that he's untouchable. He already has really solid defense and offense. No one can really hit him, and he has insane power to fight back with. But beyond these obvious ones, he has other crazy things too. So let's cover the other absurd stands he'd have as well. These are going to be ordered by each part. They won't be perfectly chronological, but this gives some structure. And if you're liking this video so far, be sure to drop a like. It really does help out the channel a lot. For one, he has Hierophant Green, which will let him possess people. Of course, he might not use that, but we're going over every ability that he would have. Then he has Magician's Red, which lets him manipulate fire. There's also going to be some overlap here, so I might skip some stands because some of them have similar abilities. One interesting one that he'd have is Geb, which he could probably channel Hamon through, since water can conduct that. So imagine that being used for long-range Hamon attacks. There's also the Sun stand. So if the power of the Sun in Hamon isn't enough, he could use the power of the Sun in another way. He's also going to have Cream and the Hand. With these 2 together, it's going to be pretty deadly. They're already insane on their own, and even though Okuyasu couldn't use the Hand to its fullest, Joseph definitely could. Obviously the 2 aren't exactly the same, but I'm covering them together because they share some similarities. There's also Crazy Diamond, the stand from Joseph's son Josuke. Josuke was pretty creative with the stand, and I would think that Joseph could be too. He could use this to repair and manipulate inanimate objects in pretty unique ways. Another really potent stand is Heaven's Door. Joseph is pretty good with analyzing his opponents, but now he could literally read their actions, or at least read what they're capable of doing, and write some extra things in there to change the battle. Then there's Red Hot Chili Pepper, letting him absorb electricity for power and attack with great speeds. He also has a couple different stands that can affect people's health, like Purple Haze, which could use a deadly virus. There's Grateful Dead, which can rapidly age its opponents. Then there's Green Day, using its deadly mold. He'd also have White Album, which lets him manipulate ice, but that kind of overlaps with Horus a bit, and also overlaps with Weather Report, which we'll get to later on. Stone Ocean could be pretty useful for him. Given the ways that Jolene was able to use it, I feel like Joseph could be pretty creative with it too. And who knows, maybe he could channel Hamon through the string, since the string comes from his body. Maybe this could be like a more effective Hermit Purple. He'd have Green Grass of Home, which is the stand of the Green Baby. He's already pretty much untouchable as is, like Wonder of You's there, Gold Experience Requiem's there, and D4C Love Train's there too. But then this would also make him untouchable in another way, making it so opponents can't reach him. And now back to Weather Report. This stand is particularly deadly because of all the different things it could do. Weather manipulation is very versatile. Like, just look at all the ways it was used in the series. Water manipulation, air manipulation, fire, ice, light. He can even make it rain poison frogs. This stand can be used in so many different creative ways, like on a large scale by controlling weather, but also a small scale, like by poisoning the air. One stand that people might overlook is Bohemian Rhapsody. This stand can bring fictional characters to life. Of course, you could defeat it by making a fake character that's meant to defeat this stand, but if the opponent doesn't know that, this could be really tricky to fight. It would really depend on what characters exist within JoJo, or whatever verse this is happening in. But funny enough, he already has a pretty huge arsenal. Spider-Man and Batman exist in JoJo, so all Marvel and DC characters are fair game. Mickey Mouse exists, which means Disney exists. So any of their properties like Star Wars, for example, that's fair game too. Weirdly enough, a couple different shonen series exist too. At least Shonen Jump does, because Fist of the North Star exists in JoJo, and JJK might also exist in JoJo because in the live-action Rohan show, Nobara's mentioned, so he could bring Gojo and Sukuna to life. But not just that, probably any Shonen Jump character. Naturally, these characters would act as themselves, so they're not going to act out of character. But like, who's to say he can't just make Goku real? And since Goku's always looking for a good fight, maybe talk to him, become friends with him, and basically sit Goku on his opponents. That's terrifying. Also, the stand could apply stories to other people. So not just bringing the characters to life, but also making people go through those stories. There are so many ways this stand could be used. We can go even further into this, but that would create a huge tangent. You might think Joseph having every stand is bad, since some stands might be bad. But that wouldn't really matter to him, because he has White Snake. If we actually give him every stand here, then he could remove any of the bad stands from himself and put them into a disc, and actually use them as weapons. Of course, having every stand at once would suck for a bit. He'd probably be able to survive it, but once he figures this out, he can remove any of the bad stands, and then transfer them to other people, using them as weapons in some way. He also has further time manipulation with Mandom. Even if it's a bit redundant with the time manipulation at this point, this one can actually help, because Killer Queen Bites the Dust is more potent in terms of how much time it rewinds, but this stand can be used more frequently and more easily, even though it's only a few seconds that it rewinds. There's also other ways he could separate his body, like with Oh Lonesome Me and Doggy Style, on top of what Stone Free could do. And since we're using every cannon stand, he'd have at least 2 Requiem stands, Chariot Requiem and Gold Experience Requiem, which both use the same stand arrow, but that would mean he'd have at least 1 arrow with him. The effects of the stand arrow change depending on the situation and the stand that it's used on, so it's impossible to say how this would work here. But hypothetically, he could just take the arrow and move it to whatever other stand he wants to, and turn other stands into Requiems at any given time, which is pretty crazy. On top of that, as we covered through this video, he has Hamon. Stands like Hermit Purple could channel this, so even if a stand can't channel it for some reason, he could wrap Hermit Purple around it. Or use Stone Free for this too, because the string from Stone Free is literally from his body, so he could wrap those 2 stands around other stands and channel Hamon through it. Not just that, he'd have Spin at its fullest level. He'd have Tusk, Ball Breaker, and Soft and Wet. So he'd have multiple ways to use the Golden Spin and the Super Spin. Not just through those stands, but just innately probably. With every stand he has pretty much every ability. All he lacks are the abilities from vampires like Dio, or the abilities from Pillarman and the Rock Humans. But he can already really do what they do and do it better. Life manipulation from Cars, Gold Experience handles that. Heat manipulation from Dio, he has multiple stands that could do that. Regeneration, again, multiple stands could help him with that. But what if he actually did have every ability here? The biggest change is the fact that he'd have Cars' biology, greater senses, innate regeneration, and life manipulation without needing stands. But most importantly, an IQ of 400. Joseph is already stupidly smart as is. I guess that's a bad oxymoron, but you get what I mean. Imagine Joseph being even smarter though, his trickery and strategies with even more brain power on top of the stands he already has. And to make his Hamon even more powerful, he could just find the Redstone of Asia again. With all the powers he has, getting it in his possession wouldn't be too hard, buffing him even further. And he could likely combine powers from these stands in some way, as in not actually fusing the stands, but using one power and then swapping to another. I guess he could fuse the stands in one way by using equivalent exchange, but that won't be an innate ability he has. For example, he could stop time with Star Platinum the World, then use Heaven's Door, or like any other stand in time stop. That power alone with other stands is pretty cracked. He controls multiple elements, so he could basically be a bootleg Todoroki, for example, using Magician's Red for fire and White Album for ice, or any other various stands, things like that. Like, you could just slap these stands on top of him and say he's gonna have all those powers, but consider how they'd work together too. That's where the true power of this would come from. Combining his intellect with the different powers that he has from all these stands, that can make some really deadly combinations. So besides the crazy powers he has by default, he'd have things that we probably can't even think of right now, thanks to having all of these together. The possibilities with how we could use these stands and these powers together are pretty much endless. But let me know what you think below. Was there anything I glossed over on accident? Or are there other aspects of his power that would be pretty crazy? As usual, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video.